Sew the required positions of the fabric pieces together. Let's start by sewing the front and back pieces. The sewing is done on the right side. Place the wrong sides of the front and back pieces facing each other. Cut a piece of yarn, about 1 meter long, and thread it into the needle. Here, I have already threaded it. Start by sewing the right side of the fabric pieces. Find the bottom of the front piece. With the sewing needle, pick up the horizontal carried yarn between the two edge stitches from bottom to top. Pay attention, here at the very bottom is where the stitch holder was removed, leaving the loops. When picking up the carried yarn, make sure not to pick the wrong one. On both sides of the carried yarn, there should be a V-shaped texture pointing upwards. Pick up the lowest strand of carried yarn and pass through. Pull the yarn outwards. Leave about 10 centimeters in length without pulling it all the way through. Next, find the corresponding position on the back piece. Similarly, pick up the horizontal carried yarn between the two edge stitches from bottom to top. Pull it through, tighten gently. When pulling, be mindful not to pull out the reserved yarn tail. Continue picking up the carried yarn above the previously sewn position on the front piece and sewing once. Then pick up the corresponding position on the back piece. Sew once. The front and back pieces are matched up this way. By picking up the horizontal carried yarns for sewing, continue sewing upwards. Keep sewing all the way to the top, where the armhole binding off begins. After sewing each segment, gently tighten the yarn tail. Again, be sure not to pull out the reserved tail. Continue until this edge is fully sewn. After completing the sewing, take the yarn tail to the wrong side of the fabric. Hide it along the texture on the wrong side. Secure the reserved yarn tail in the same way. The seam on this side of the front and back pieces is now finished. The hole at the top is for attaching the sleeve. The other side of the front and back pieces is sewn using the same method. Please sew it yourself. Next, we will sew the sleeves. Start by sewing the two side edges of the sleeve piece. Fold the fabric piece with the right side facing out. On the right side, sew upwards from the bottom, sew both side edges together. The sewing method is the same as for the front and back pieces. Please sew them yourself. I have already finished sewing this part. Next, attach the sleeves to the front and back pieces. The sleeve sewing still takes place on the right side. Start sewing from the underarm position. You can now attach the sleeve at the corresponding positions above and below the armhole. Mark them with stitch markers. At the very bottom, on the side of the fabric piece, along the sewing line. Place a stitch marker. The center point at the very top, and the shoulder bind-off line. Place a stitch marker there. After marking, we can start sewing. Take the sewing needle threaded with the yarn. The thread is about 1 meter long. Pass the needle under the loops of the bind-off stitches on the front piece, from back to front. Exit at the center of the V shape along the edge. Leave a 10 centimeter tail, and don't pull the yarn completely through. Then go upwards, passing horizontally through the sleeves bind-off stitches, at the corresponding V-shape position. Pull the yarn through. Be careful not to pull out the reserved tail. Then go back to the front piece, passing horizontally through a V-shape. Here, the V-shape is facing downward. After completing this step, on the sleeve piece, pass horizontally through the adjacent V-shape to the left. Here, the V-shape is facing upward. The position for binding off is matched up like this. Sewing horizontally through the V-shapes. Follow this method to sew the bind-off section completely. After finishing the bind-off section, proceed to sew the decrease sections. The sewing technique here is the same as for joining the front and back pieces. Pick up the carrying yarn between two edge stitches and sew them together correspondingly. If the number of carrying yarn strands doesn't match during the sewing process, you can pick 2 carrying yarn strands from the fabric piece with more strands, and match it with 1 carrying yarn strand from the side with fewer strands. Then sew them together. Adjust using this method as needed. Continue sewing downward. Until you reach the top of the sleeve piece, near the bind-off position. Approximately, 3 V-shapes correspond to 4 carrying yarn strands. If the number of loops and carrying yarn strands don't match, make adjustments promptly. You can pick up 1 extra carrying yarn strand, or 1 less carrying yarn strand when sewing. Just make sure the stitches are roughly even. Following this method, continue sewing to complete the round. When you reach the underarm area, sew 2 additional stitches to prevent any gaps from forming. After finishing, bring the yarn tail to the wrong side of the fabric. And weave in the ends on the wrong side as well. This is the sewing method for attaching the sleeves to the front and back pieces. The sewing method for the other side is the same as well. Please sew it up on your own. Next, we will knit the neckline and take a look. The neckline is knitted by pick up stitches and work them back and forth in 2 times 2 ribbing above the front and back pieces. You will also need to leave buttonholes. Please watch as I demonstrate the specific knitting method. Now let's continue with knitting the neckline. Find the section 3, piece 2 of the front piece. At the position where you continuously bind off the stitches, insert the needle into the V shape. Below the farthest right bound off loop, join the yarn here. Pick up the strand. The next position for binding off and decreasing stitches is about to correspond 1 by 1. Insert into the V shape, and pick up the stitch. When you reach the position for working evenly, insert between the two edge stitches. Pick up the stitch. Here also pick up stitches corresponding one by one. Pick up one stitch from each hole. While picking up stitches, check the number of stitches at the same time. The total stitches after picking up should be a multiple of 4 plus 2. The method for picking up stitches on the back piece is identical, whether it's the position for working evenly, or the position for decreasing and binding off. You still pick up stitches corresponding one by one. At the position for working evenly, you can adjust appropriately. Skip 1 to 2 stitches. Refer to your chart to complete picking up all the stitches for the neckline. That's how you finish picking up stitches. Picking up stitches counts as one row. Our row 1 is now completed. Next, continue referring to the chart. Complete rows 2 through 4. Don't forget at the corresponding position in row 3 to make a buttonhole. The position for the buttonhole is marked on the chart. After completing, use the Icelandic bind-off method to finish the binding off. That concludes the explanation of the neckline knitting technique. Next, let's learn the hem knitting method. For the hem, you need to remove the holding thread from the back piece cast on. Thread the loops together on the back piece loops and the remaining front piece loops. Knit the 2x2 ribbing pattern back and forth. Please watch as I demonstrate the specific knitting method. First, we will thread the loops from the cast-on edge. Remove the waste yarn used for threading the loops and the holding thread from the back piece cast on. Then, put the loops back onto the needle. Note that, on both sides of the seam, at the position of the fabric edge, since we sewed in one stitch during the seam. Therefore, for the 2 stitches of the fabric near the seam edge, when threading the loops, we need to turn them into one stitch. Let's start with the loops from section 1, piece 1 of the front piece. After threading it, we will then proceed to combine the 2 stitches on the far right into one. Use the right needle to pick up the stitch on the left side and pass it over the stitch on the right side. This way, the 2 stitches become one. Next, remove the holding thread from the back piece. after threading the 2 loops. Similarly, pick up 1 stitch on the left side and pass it over. Continue threading the remaining loops. After finishing the last 2 loops of the back piece, similarly, pick up the loop on the left and pass it over. Next, let's thread the loops of Section 1, Piece 2 of the front piece. Start by threading the first 2 loops. Pick them up and pass them over. Then thread all the remaining loops. Now all the loops have been threaded, and the stitch count has been adjusted properly. Next, join the yarn to work row 1. Simply refer to the chart and follow the corresponding stitches. The stitch patterns for the small and large sizes here are not identical. Make sure to strictly follow your own chart to complete all the loops. After finishing all the loops, we need to pick up 1 stitch from the adjacent section 4 of front piece. Here, we are working on the right side, inserting into the loop knitwise at the edge of the left section 4 fabric. And picking up 1 stitch. This completes our first row. Next, turn the work and start the second row. First, refer to the chart. And complete all the loops on the needle. After finishing the loops on the needle, locate the adjacent section 4 of front piece. Since we are working on the wrong side here, insert into purlwise the inner side of the edge stitch of the fabric piece. Pick up 1 stitch. This way, the second row is now completed. For the third and fourth rows, the method is similar to these 2 rows. On the right side, follow the chart and work the loops on the needle. After completing it, pick up a stitch knitwise from the adjacent fabric piece in section 4. On the wrong side, refer to the chart and work all the loops. Then pick up one stitch purlwise from the adjacent fabric piece in section 4. After completing the 4th row, use the Icelandic bind-off method to bind off all the loops on the needle. Up to this point, the hem knitting technique has been fully explained. Next, let's sew on the accessories. The accessories include 2 types of buttons, 3 large round buttons, and 3 small square buttons. The large round buttons are sewn in the positions that correspond to the buttonholes on both sleeves, and the buttonhole corresponding to the collar position. The small square buttons are sewn in the positions that correspond to the buttonholes on piece 2 of section 4 of the front piece, and on piece 1, where it matches up with the buttonholes. The sewing method for all buttons is identical. First, we locate the positions corresponding to the buttonholes. At the position where you will sew the button, place a stitch marker to mark it. For all 6 buttons that need to be sewn, mark their positions with stitch markers. Once that's done, we can start sewing. Now I'll demonstrate sewing the buttons. The positions here are random, whether it's a large round button or a small square button. The sewing method is the same for both. Find the position marked by the stitch marker, cut a piece of yarn about 30 centimeters long, and thread it into the needle. Take out your button. Here, I've already threaded the needle. Pass the needle from the back of the fabric piece to the front through the fabric. Leave about 10 centimeters of tail and don't pull it all the way through. You can now remove the stitch marker. Next, pass the needle through the button, and then back through the corresponding position on the fabric piece. Sew a few times to secure it. Make sure the button is sewn tightly. After sewing, bring the thread to the wrong side of the fabric. Then join it with the previously left yarn tail, and tie a knot to secure it in place. This is the method for sewing on one button. Repeat this process to sew all the buttons. Finally, hide all remaining yarn tails on the wrong side of the piece, following the texture of the fabric. Up to this point, the knitting tutorial for this sweater is now complete. If you have any questions during the process, don't hesitate to reach us via our website. Susan's Family, supporting your handwork experience, sharing the joy of life. Thank you all for watching. See you in the next episode.